I can't recall my exact thoughts in that moment, but I believe the phrase I uttered was, "What the fuck?" It was some time before I worked up the courage to leave my temporary sanctuary and brave the terrors that lay beyond its walls. I finally decided it was safe to do so, as no other celestial entities or bloodthirsty demons appeared on the horizon, and all was quiet other than the distant din of thunder. Cautiously exiting, I observed the still twitching bodies of the mutilated harpies, almost retching at the foul stench as they slowly and painfully expired on the blood-stained grass. I avoided the doomed creatures, noting how even the severed head continued to move its eyes and jaw. How could this be possible? The most logical conclusion is that I suffered a head injury during the crash and was now suffering from some sort of paranoid delusion. But everything about this place seemed so real, from the raindrops on my skin to the electric energy created by the violent storm. So, what other explanation could there be? I suddenly remembered my Catholic upbringing, with lessons on angels, demons, and miracles occurring on our mortal plane. I'd long since dismissed these parables as works of fiction, but how could I rationalize what I'd just witnessed? My logical brain could not deal with the implications in that moment, so I decided to focus on the here and now, and most importantly, my own survival. I'd come to Tartarus Island with a clear mission, but this had all gone to shit. My transport was down, my team were dead, and I was stranded without any means of contacting the mainland. I'd discovered as much during my time cowering inside the cottage when I realized my cell phone had been smashed beyond repair during the crash. It wasn't clear what was happening here on the island or whether these events were widespread. In any event, I saw no point in continuing with my own mission. There was no telling whether Cain had survived this unexplained event, and even if he had, the serial killer was the least of my worries now. Instead of succumbing to panic, I controlled my breathing and forced myself to remember the briefings and the maps of the island I'd studied in preparation for our mission. I remembered the cliffs on the eastern side of the landmass and recalled that the one and only settlement lay roughly 1.5 miles to the southwest. I was far from a road, but could surely walk the distance in a short space of time. Hopefully there would be someone still alive and in charge at the fishing village, or a telephone line or radio I could use to call the mainland. This was my plan, but predictably, it didn't turn out as expected. How can I describe the wonders and horrors I witnessed during my short walk across the island? The storm raged on, and I was soon drenched with cold rain, adding to the misery I was already suffering due to my throbbing head. But through the dark clouds above, I occasionally saw shards of white light breaking through, like beacons leading to a safe port beyond the violent chaos. I watched these beams of impossibly bright illumination and was astonished to witness figures being physically pulled upwards into the light, as if they were being transported by some type of tractor beam. From such a distance, I could not see the faces of those being taken, but I noticed how not one struggled against the celestial power or screamed for help. It seemed these individuals were at peace and content to be taken from our world and transported to whatever lay beyond the darkness. They were the lucky ones, but worse sights were to come. I passed by an area of marshland on my way to the village, keeping my distance so not to become trapped in the bog. But others had fallen afoul of this trap, whether it was naturally occurring or not. I saw the doomed figures slowly sinking into the bog, their eyes filled with terror as they screamed desperately for help. I did try to assist these poor souls, but couldn't reach them without putting myself in the same position. And so, to my eternal shame, I was forced to simply stand back and watch as the damned disappeared under the mud one by one, dragged down to an uncertain but surely unenviable fate. I waited until the last head went under before moving on, trying to put the horrors to the back of my mind as I selfishly focused on saving my own skin. The village wasn't much to look at, consisting of a motley collection of wooden homes with sheet metal roofs, a small church adorned with a towering crucifix, and a handful of family-owned businesses. All were set along the small harbor, protected by concrete seawalls. The harbor was the island's lifeline, as fishing was the main employer and the only ferry to the mainland set sail from here. But there wasn't a single boat I could see that was still afloat or undamaged. Powerful waves beat against the sea barriers, and the harbor was no longer safe, as fishing boats broke from their moorings and smashed against the jetty and rocks. I scanned the wind and rain-swept dock in search of the ferry, only to find it partly submerged in the middle of the harbor, its bow just about visible above the waterline. I shook my head in dismay, realizing that escape by water was a near impossibility. It seemed there wasn't a single seaworthy ship left in harbor, and even if there had been, it would be near suicidal to set sail whilst the storm still raged. I quickly abandoned this plan and ran for shelter in the village, trying the doors one by one, but receiving no answers to my frantic knocking. In fact, I hadn't seen a single person in either the harbor or village. Eerily, it seemed like the entire settlement was abandoned. Eventually, I found a small cottage where the front door was unlocked. I announced myself before entering, but found no one inside. Whoever lived here, it seemed they'd left in a hurry, as I discovered toast and coffee laid out on the kitchen table, both still warm. There was a phone line inside the house, but when I lifted the receiver, I discovered it was dead. Cursing, I left the empty home and proceeded to the far side of the village. Here, I found what passed for the sheriff's station. Really more of a hut, converted into a small office and armory with a single holding cell at the rear. Tartarus wasn't exactly a high-crime location. Kane was the exception, of course, although it seemed he only committed murders off-island. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end as I approached the station, a sixth sense warning me of a potential threat. Instinctively, I withdrew my pistol as I cautiously entered the building. But as soon as I was through the door, I heard the distinctive click-click of a shotgun being loaded, and I realized someone had got the drop on me. And when my assailant spoke, I recognized a deep but still feminine voice, which spoke to me in no uncertain terms. "Drop your gun and turn around slowly," she ordered. I realized I had no chance, and so did as instructed, carefully laying my service pistol down on the ground and putting my hands up as I slowly turned to face her. In the corner of the small office, perched behind a desk, was a uniformed deputy, a woman in her mid to late 30s, plain-faced with her brunette hair tied back in a bun and a no-nonsense look in her focused brown eyes. But what really concerned me was the 12-gauge pump action she held tightly in her hands, the barrel aimed directly at my head. "Who the hell are you?" she inquired aggressively. I took a breath, answering calmly as I provided my name and rank. "I'm going to get my badge from my pocket," I said carefully, waiting until I received a nod of approval from the shotgun-wielding officer. Slowly and purposefully, I showed her my credentials and was relieved when she lowered her shotgun and laid it down on the desk. "So you're the agent from the mainland they sent to arrest that asshole Kane," she said with a sudden flicker of understanding. "Yes," I confirmed, "and you must be Tanya, the sheriff's deputy." She replied with a firm nod, and the tension inside the station lessened as I picked up my gun from the floor and returned it to my holster. A short pause ensued before Tanya asked her next question. "What happened to the rest of your team?" she asked. "All dead," I replied whilst trying unsuccessfully to hide the guilt in my voice. "Our chopper got struck by lightning and crash landed. I was one of 2 survivors. The other man was taken by something." The look on Tanya's face said it all, as clearly she knew what I was referring to. "Where's the sheriff, Tanya?" I asked frantically. "And what the fuck happened here?" "The sheriff's dead," replied a hard-faced Tanya, with only a hint of emotion evident in her voice. "One of those monsters got him. As for what's happening, well, I can only speculate, but it seems pretty clear to me." "Oh yeah," I replied, not fully wanting to hear her theory. "You a religious man, Mr. Fed?" she inquired. "Do you know your book of Revelations? Surely you know about the rapture, right?" I wasn't overly surprised by her conclusion and had no plausible alternative suggestion, and yet I could not accept this chilling explanation. "You can't be serious," I exclaimed. "This isn't the end of the world. It can't be." Tanya merely shrugged her shoulders dismissively. "All I can tell you is what I've seen and heard," she explained in a surprisingly calm tone. "It started shortly after midnight, when the storm closed in and the ground began to shake. The ferry was struck by lightning and sank in the harbor, and all our lines to the mainland were cut off. I've lived on this island my whole life and never saw anything like it. Still, at first we reckoned it was a natural disaster, but then things got really weird." "Weird how?" I asked timidly. "You've seen some screwed up things since you got here, haven't you, G-Man?" she asked, almost flippantly. "Winged demons ripping people to shreds, angels descending from the heavens to fight their immortal enemies. They took the children first, pulled them up into the light and through the darkness. I guess they were the innocent ones, those without sin. After the kids, some went up, others were pulled down, and more than a few fell victim to the monsters." "So what are you saying?" I interjected. "Are we the only ones left?" Tanya shook her head, in the negative. "No, not quite. I've been across the island and identified 2 groups of survivors split into rival factions. The first group is up at the lighthouse. They're good folk for the most part. Not saints by any means, but decent citizens. The second faction, however, well, they're holed up in the tavern. And I'm sorry to say, these people have turned to the dark side." She paused momentarily, speaking her next words in little more than a whisper. "They're all following Cain now. He's their leader." "Joseph Cain?" I exclaimed in genuine shock. "You're telling me he's survived all this?" "Afraid so," Tanya answered solemnly, "although I don't think it's a coincidence. Murders aside, there's been dark rumors about Cain for years. Talk of occult rituals, a deal with the devil. I think he's been preparing for this day for a long time." My head was spinning as a result of these frankly unbelievable revelations. Suddenly, I was unable to stand on my own 2 feet, and so I stumbled over to the bench and plonked myself down, holding my heavy head in my hands.